Thank you. Thank you both for coming in. The Columbian is pleased to welcome candidates. Let's see, I think I grabbed the wrong one. For the 17th Legislative District, I'm good there, thanks. Position number 2. And thank you both for coming in. I'm Greg Jane, the editorial page editor, and this is Craig Brown, the managing editor of the paper. Say your title? Editor of the paper, I apologize. And a member of the editorial board. I apologize, the other editorial board members are not available today, so you're stuck with just us. Reporter Jake Thomas is sitting in. He won't be asking questions here, but he might want to speak with you afterwards. And we are videotaping this. We will post it unedited on our website for the benefit of our readers. So with the housekeeping out of the way, why don't we start? We'll take 1 to 2 minutes, introduce yourselves, explain why you were running, and then we'll get on to some specific policy questions. And we'll start with Damion.
My name is Damion Jiles. I'm a father of 3, 2 sons in Ridgefield School District, and I have a daughter that goes to the University of Washington. I'm a 12-year Army veteran. I've been in the Clark County area since 2004 and Ridgefield since 2005. I'm a native Houstonian, but I am proud to call Clark County my home. I'm running for the 17th because I would like to see some effective change in this area. Some of the skill sets I would bring to the table would be leadership, dedication to duty, and discipline. I'd like to see things like healthcare, infrastructure, and education to be taken to the next level. We have a bridge that is in dire need of replacement. I feel that things like repairing and replacing the bridge, adding additional bridges along the way, I believe that could add to our infrastructure, which would bring jobs. We could start there. I would like to see changes to our education system. I would like to see pathways to the skilled trades in our high schools. So those are a few of the reasons why I'm running for office.
Great, thank you. And we will get into some of those issues in more depth. Paul?
Sure. So Paul Harris, I've had the opportunity of being the state representative in the 17th for 8 years. I'm a father of 5. I've lived in the 17th district for about almost 40 years now. Served 10 years on the Evergreen School Board. Have been a small business owner in the community. I think the reasons I'm seeking re-election is I believe I've been able to make a difference and can continue to make a difference for the area. I worked on the Educational Funding Task Force for McCleary. I was one of the 8 that worked on that, spent a lot of time on that. I have also been one that's formed and passed legislation to form the Bridge Commission, which I do agree that we do need to replace the I-5 bridge. I have formed organizations, hopefully, that will do that with the state of Oregon. I serve on the Healthcare Committee. I agree with Damion that I do believe we need to make changes into our healthcare system. And we'll be one that will look at increasing the Medicaid rates to Medicare, and hopefully we can get some of the access of care issues that have been lacking. Even with the Affordable Health Care Act, there's still a lot of people who've still not been able to access care, and I believe there's a couple things that we can do that can address that. And I just feel like there's unfinished business and would love to continue to represent the people of the 17th district.
Great, thank you both. We'll start out, there are obviously several big topics we could get to. Let's start with the bridge. Damion, what would be your preferred solution, and how can the legislature be involved in that?
My preferred solution initially would be replacement. That bridge has been deemed as a vital importance to national security. And as a veteran, I understand what it means to have to be able to move beans and bullets and troops along our roads. So that brings about a vital importance. With the replacement of that bridge, it would help to ease congestion. We can run light rail and HOV lanes, mass transit across the bridge as well. As been stated before, we can build a bridge as big and whatever as we want and run everything we possibly can across it. But there also has to be mitigation along the approach of the bridge on each side. So I would also advocate that additional lanes or some widening on either side, because you have a choke point once you come out of downtown Portland approaching the bridge. You have a choke point there which slows traffic down. And I heard somebody say once before that it doesn't make any sense to have a drawbridge on a main thoroughfare such as I-5, and it made perfect sense to me when I heard that statement. So for me, I would say a solution that parallels the 205 in terms of height between base of the bridge and surface of the water. I would say something like that would be a little bit more beneficial for marine traffic. And after we complete that project, then I would say looking at putting in other crossings east and west of the bridge.
Now, and would you favor light rail on a replacement bridge?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I used to take light rail to work when I worked in downtown Portland. When I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, I would take the MAX every morning to work. You know, I know that the argument is running light rail across a bridge would bring crime into the areas, and to me, that's a baseless argument, because nobody's going to take a train from their house to somebody else's house, you know, to rob it, because you'd look pretty stupid standing at a bus stop or a train station with TVs and what have you, trying to get back home. You'd be pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious what you've done, you know. So you'd stick out like a sore thumb.
Okay, thanks. Paul, how would you approach the bridge?
So I'd approach the bridge. You know, we've gone down this road literally once before. So I think if it was just the state of Washington, the bridge would have been built by now. But we need to reach
Except
across.
Washington is the one who scuttled the plan.
Well, what I'm saying is that this is two states having to come to an agreement on how they're going to build a bridge. And so I could discuss a variety of things on infrastructure and whatnot, but the first thing that needs to happen to me is that we need to sit down with the state of Oregon and come to an agreement that we agree that we need to replace the I-5 bridge. And the plans on how that looks and all that needs to be dealt with by other people. But we as two states need to get together and come to an agreement on replacing the I-5 bridge. We passed a bill, and we will continue. The bridge would be of statewide significance. I think that's very important, because I believe it is. We have formed a bridge commission, and we've reached out to the state of Oregon. They have responded. I believe that they will sit down with us, and we will have that opportunity to start having a dialogue on what this bridge will look like, or at least that we are in agreement that we need to do the bridge. And then a lot of things that Damion said are exactly accurate. I think we have some infrastructure along those lines that need to be taken place to make sure that we can move, that when we get done with this, that we can actually move more traffic. We do have choke points, and hopefully we can resolve those. The state of Oregon is doing some infrastructure around the Rose Quarter, which I think will help a lot. They're going to open up a lane there that's one of the choke points. So I think there's a lot of good that's taking place. So, yeah.
Would you support light rail on the bridge?
I would prefer rapid bus transit, because I believe that's the direction our county and our city is headed on. We have rapid bus here. I would be in favor of rapid bus transit.
And what can the legislature do regarding Oregon's proposal for tolls?
I think what we can do is, I think the first thing we need to do is, we've sent a letter. We have all weighed in as a Southwest delegation. Everybody signed the letter. So the 49th, the 18th, and the 17th sent a letter to the state of Oregon that we didn't agree with their tolling scheme, and that we felt like it was unfair to Clark County residents. I think the one thing we need to do is to stand back, and I don't think that the federal government will allow what the state of Oregon wants to do. They have not allowed this in any other state to do this, and so I think, first off, I think we need to see if it's going to be allowed. I don't think it will, but I think we just need to continue to weigh in. I went over to Oregon and I spoke against the tolling scheme. Representative Wiley did, Vicki Kraft did, Representative Vick did. I think we've all have weighed in at different times. We all signed a joint letter, and I think we need to continue to make our voices heard that we don't agree with what they're doing.
Damion, what are your thoughts about Oregon's tolling?
I agree with Paul in that Congress is more than likely will not allow Oregon to toll federal roads like that. I don't believe that would happen. Legislatively, I believe a little bit more could be done or should be done than simply writing a letter. I think that the two states need to come to the table and have some serious discussion about how one affects the other. Because pendulum swings both ways, so one cause can affect the other. So if Oregon tolls us, we know what that can do to a single mother trying to get to work. It could be the difference in that mom trying to get to work or having to stay home and miss out on work and wages. tolls like that could affect small businesses that leave the Clark County area and have to cross that bridge. Though that could be the difference in putting businesses out of work, out of business. So for me, I would like to see the legislator work a little bit more with Oregon's legislation, in more of a facet than just sending a letter. I think a little bit more could be done from that.
I want to say, once again, we've had dialogue with them. We have weighed in extensively on this issue, and we will continue as a delegation. All of us, everyone in this area agrees that we feel like this is a bad plan and that it's truly not fair.
What kind of response have you gotten from Oregon?
They understand. I think our mayor, they understand that we're not on board, and they certainly understand that the disdain that we have for the plan. I would love to say it's curtailed them, but I think they're still marching down the same road. Oregon has a lot of financial problems right now, and I think this is just one way that they're looking at that they think that they can solve some of their problems is on the backs, honestly, of Southwest Washington people, and I completely disagree. And their pension plans, the variety of problems they have, I believe I do not want to have any part of, and so we have continued to voice those concerns.
Now that brings up one of Oregon's financial problems surrounds TriMet.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people feel that's why they want to extend light rail up here. Damion, you're in favor of light rail. Do you have any concern about hooking up to a financially troubled system?
I'm not too much in the know of what TriMet's issue is over there in terms of finance, so I would need to study up on that before I can give you a well-informed answer. I don't agree with the notion of their financial issue being solved with dangling the carrot out in front of the horse with bringing light rail over here to Vancouver. If that's their only reason is to ease their financial problems, then I don't agree with that. I don't think that one state should solve any of their financial problems on the back of another. That to me is just that's fiscally irresponsible for that to even be considered as a solution. Enough of Clark County residents, especially those out of the 17th, cross that river every day, be it the 5 or the 205, to go to work. For me, I used to have to take the light rail from Gateway or Park Rose, whichever one it was. The first stop after the airport is where I would hop the Max and head downtown. It was convenient for me because I really wasn't familiar with C-Tran because I had just moved to the area. So after I had taken another job downtown within the federal government, I then learned the C-Tran system. So I would take C-Tran because it stops by my house. But to the question, no, I don't feel that should be the reason. I believe that the reason should be because it's a joint effort and a recognition of solving one main problem, and that's traffic.
Moving on, Paul, you mentioned you were on the McCleary committee.
Yeah, I was one of 8. Spent last summer dealing with McCleary. Yeah.
So, are you happy with how it came out? What do you think of that?
I was very happy, actually, with the work that we did and with the amount of money we put into education. 2242 was excellent legislation, and we met the court's demands. The Supreme Court weighed in that we met the McCleary decision. The McCleary decision is just a court case. It was a lawsuit filed against the state of Washington, and we met that suit. We met the claims that were within that suit, and the Supreme Court said that we did, and we did, and we put the money into education.
What about the time frame? Would you have done that differently? Was there a reason that it took 6 years to meet the court mandate?
I think the reason it took so long was to make sure to try to find an equitable way that we could fund basic education throughout the entire state of Washington, where everyone was treated fairly. Very difficult when you look at the geographical and the economic situations throughout the entire state. It's very difficult to create a fair system that's going to treat everybody exactly the same. I think we did a good enough job that the Supreme Court recognized the task that was before us, and they agreed that the, if you want to call it a levy swap or taking allocation of dollars and move it into the state budget as far as property taxes from 150 to 270, realizing that some areas had never passed a levy, so those areas were automatically tacked onto $1.50. So yeah, I think it did. I was a little sad at some of the strikes this year, but we had a bill, actually, part of McCleary, a part of the 2242 actually addressed that. And there was a bill that was passed on the last day, and it was, I always forget this bill, it was 6362. Senate Bill 6362 put a cap of 3.1%. That's all they could raise the salaries. But that was removed on a strictly partisan vote. All the Republicans voted no, all the Democrats voted yes. And thus, we had teacher strikes this year because we had more money go into the system this year than we're going to have, actually a little bit more this year than will go in next year, just the way the property taxes roll.
Sure.
And we were concerned about this. But that bill, the fix that was put in 2242 was removed. And so when that was removed, it created a lot of questions for a lot of districts. And as you saw, a lot of districts negotiated much higher salaries.
Sure. Damion, what were your thoughts about the McCleary fix and public education in the state?
A sign of a flourishing society is one that is educated, and I feel that education should be one of the top priorities in any given state. So I feel that it's a travesty that the McCleary decision had to even be rendered, that the state had to even be taken to court to fulfill its constitutional mandate to fully fund public education, K through 12. For me, I would say that, even though the decision is made, it's kind of like one of those things where you tell your kid, go clean your room, and they do just that, but they don't get into the nitty gritty, they don't get into the deep cleaning. So by that analogy, I mean that yes, the McCleary decision was, has been adhered to. Yes, K through 12 has been funded, but at what expense? The legislature sent the money down to school districts, and what we saw were strikes because districts felt like they should be able to keep the money and do as they please with it instead of do what it was allocated, which was for teacher salaries. For me, if I were in a position to have made the decision on how that money is to be allocated, I think, and if it's possible, would to have put specific stipulations on it that this is strictly for teacher salaries. And then, as Paul has stated, yes, they got this and something, that's going to trickle off a little bit next year based on property taxes. But I feel like it should be a performance-based budget on the line item, because education should be something that it shouldn't be, well, we'll just throw this dollar amount at it and that's going to be it. It should be something that should be constantly monitored. So if you have to make changes to increase in one section and decrease in the other, that those things can be made on the fly, so we're not seeing things like teacher strikes, and we're not seeing things like teachers having to work 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. That's some of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. We entrust our kids, and he has obviously clearly more than I do, but we entrust our kids to the public school system 8 hours a day, and I, for one, don't want my kid being in the hands of teachers that are struggling mentally with other issues such as, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to pay my car note? How am I going to feed myself? How am I going to feed my kids? That right there should never have to be a concern of a teacher. And if that's understood, then it should be understood in the legislature as well.
Paul, what is the legislature doing regarding that?
Regarding what?
To support teachers and...
Well, let's look at what's happened. So since I've been in the legislature, we've taken where 46% of our state budget, when I started, was dedicated to education. Now
K through 12.
K through 12. Now it's 52%. 52%. So we have made radical changes. In my mind, we have given a ton more money to education. I heard what Damion said, and I got to say, teachers next year will start off at $52,000 in Evergreen, and they will top out at $102,000. So what I heard in my email box from the vast majority of people was that they felt like that was more than an adequate salary. And I agree. In fact, I heard from several policemen who said, well, wait a second, I served 18 years as a police officer, and I get about 85,000, but I'm putting in literally almost twice as many hours as a teacher. I think our teachers, this was all about treating teachers fairly. I believe we are compensating teachers fairly. I believe a teacher's salary is fair. In fact, I think when we're done, we will be, after this last go through, I think we'll be in the top 8 in compensation in the United States for teacher salaries. I think our teachers proudly are being compensated fairly. And I hope we can move on to another issue. I think there are other issues in education that still need to be addressed. I think our special ed kids, I think our formula for special education needs to be fixed. I think we got a couple of fixes in transportation that need to be taking place. But remember, we drive dollars out by kids, and it's really difficult to create a formula. The reason we saw strikes somewhat, to me, is local control. And I heard what Damion said, but I don't think, unless we just want a state contract for teachers, and I know they don't want that, but that the idea is that local control is the best, where each district is a little different. Each district might have higher poverty. Each district might have, believe it or not, more special ed kids than another district. And so the idea that we're just going to carte blanche take care of everybody exactly the same when not everything is the same, I get local control. I think it's very important. I hear a lot of people say, well, gee, why don't you just dedicate this money better and make it? Well, because not every district's exactly the same. Not every kid is exactly the same. It's a very difficult formula. And so we do rely on our local districts to do the right thing. We send the money down for allocation purposes only, and they can decide within their geographic area of what type of kids they have, how they can best serve them. I think that's great, actually. I don't want to lose local control. But I've heard a lot of people screaming that they don't like the way we send out the money, but the way we sent the money was to give local control. I think that's very important still, unless we want a statewide contract.
If I may.
Yeah.
So I agree with local control. Absolutely I do. I also agree that teachers don't want a state contract. However, when we talk about compensation, I think I mentioned in my introduction, I spent a day or two in the nation's uniform, and people think the soldiers are fairly compensated. Well, when you look at the lowest pay grade in the enlisted ranks and to the highest pay grade in the enlisted ranks, we're talking E1 to E9. You're talking about a soldier a year or two in, $18,000 is what they make a year after taxes. You look at an E9. I have a friend of mine in school right now at the Sergeant Major's Academy, and we were talking E9 20 years, $60,000.
Yeah.
Is that fair compensation for anybody at 20 years in the senior ranks of anything? It's not.
Probably not.
It's not.
Yeah.
So now when we talk about fairly compensated, we had to move from, I guess if we're going to use 50,000 as the baseline, unfair compensation to fair. It should have been fair to begin with. Teachers should not have, teachers and staff, that includes the janitorial office, paraeducators, special education, the whole spectrum under the umbrella of education, there should never have been a conversation to begin with about compensation. There should have been fair raises out the gate. It should have been funded flat out.
Well, that may be, but that's, at this point, that's
It's
in the past.
It
You
is.
can't rule.
It is. But my point is, it should continue to be monitored in the future, not just, okay, we threw this money at it, the problem fixed itself, we're done.
Tell me this, do we need more state money? Do we need to increase taxes and further increase teacher salaries? Or now, isn't that a good place?
Well, I wouldn't advocate for an increase in taxes, but I would definitely advocate for, looking at the budget to see where money's going. If it's going places that are areas that it doesn't necessarily should be there, when we can move money here. Again, performance budgeting as opposed to just simple line item. Make a budget, present, and then that's what we run with for the year. If we're budgeting from a performance aspect where we're constantly monitoring what the budget does, if we're allocating money to a resource that doesn't need that much funding, or that resource is not performing the way that it should, then money should be either moved into or moved out of that particular line item for those particular for other particular line items to function at the way that they need to. You know,
Give me an example in the state budget. Give me an example of a resource that probably doesn't need that much funding. Where would you cut?
I can't think of a particular, say, department or agency off the top of my head, so we'll just use A and B. If you have A that is receiving most of the budget, or a good sized chunk of the budget, but it's performing at a base level, it's right at break-even point.
Well, but I want to get to, you don't have any specific.
No, not a specific department. No,
okay.
not a specific.
But
Just
do you know offhand what is the state budget?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Paul?
$42 billion over at biennium. Yeah, a lot of money.
So what about transportation issues besides the bridge? So I think that we see increasing traffic in Southwest Washington, and at least it's my perception that roads like State Highway 14 are overcrowded. So I guess they're finally fixing the Goodwill Lake on Highway 503 this fall. But the infrastructure there could use some improvement. And in the past, there's been some dysfunction in Southwest Washington in terms of getting funding for projects. What kinds of things need to be done to make sure that we get more money for transportation in our area, not including the bridge?
Is that directed at me or Damion?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's start with you,
Okay.
Paul.
So I think as a delegation, we meet about every other week this last session, sometimes actually every week. So the 18th, the 49th, and 17th.
And is that a fairly new development, or?
As of last year we did,
Okay.
and we prioritized our asks this time.
Okay.
So we as a group came together. I think the dysfunction took place maybe many years ago or 4 years ago, but
Sounds
we
about right. Yeah.
okay. We have become very cohesive as a group. We have prioritized our asks. We all signed on to a letter earlier asking the governor for the 179th and to the Department of Transportation to move that project up, and I believe they will. Highway 14 is a concern. We've all agreed on expansion of Highway 14. So I think we're actually working really well together, and I believe we will continue to do that. We have realized there's strength in us prioritizing our asks and making sure that we all give and take a little. And I think as a group, we've worked very well together. And I see nothing to change in that.
Okay. Davey?
I agree that traffic is an issue in this area, and I believe that what can be done from a common sense perspective is to have studies done on our traffic, on our issues, roads, and what have you, and figure out what the best solution would be, instead of just throwing money at one particular project and then moving down to the next, because it has to make sense for infrastructure. It has to make sense for residents. We can't just say, well, we're going to do this, and because this is going to ease traffic. Well, is it beneficial to the residents of the area that's going into? Because we can easily put an overpass in someplace, or you can widen 14, or you can do whatever you want to do to the 503. But how is it beneficial to the residents? Is it beneficial? How is it going to be beneficial short term? How is it going to be beneficial long term? And I think that, I think that what Paul said about getting together and forming a group and pinpointing their asks and their needs, I think that's a great thing. But how are you driving? Where are your bases for your needs coming from? And I think that's what needs to be looked at in terms of priorities of work regarding infrastructure or roads projects.
Well, and just overall, even aside from just roads.
Mhm.
So when you meet with the other members of the Southwest Washington delegation, what priorities would be most important to you as far as legislation that would benefit this region? What would be at the top of your list?
Well, clearly it would be the bridge. That's first and foremost. But secondly, I'd have to take a look at where would those areas, what are the priority areas, and work from there. Like I said, you prioritize your
But
work.
what would be your priorities?
I would have to look at what a study would produce and make my decisions from there.
I'm curious. Personally, what are your thoughts on Initiative 1639, the gun control measure on the ballot?
So I see where 1639 is trying to go. There is some language in 1639 that I don't necessarily agree with regarding HIPAA and classification of certain types of rifles. I spent time in the Army, as I stated before, and I can tell you that weapons that are classified as assault weapons are not any weapon that anybody in the military would take and go to war with. Not one. Realistically, there is no such thing as an assault rifle. It's not. AR does not stand for assault rifle. It stands for armor light, not assault rifle. I think that the language should be cleaned up and looked at, and I think the 1639 will get a little bit more support and gain a little bit more traction if they take a look at what it is they're really trying to do, because it's 1639 has the potential to cause harm to some of the citizens, and that I don't agree with. Do I agree with gun control? Absolutely. Am I about background checks and not making it easy for just anybody to get their hands on a gun? Absolutely. I believe in responsible gun ownership. I believe in the whole nine. However, I don't believe in legislating the ownership of firearms away from the people. I don't believe in that, and I don't think that because anybody can be classified with any given classification. This person has this particular whatever, this type of illness or whatever, and that can be enough for somebody to take take their gun ownership rights away from them, and I don't agree with that.
So there conceivably could be some gun control you would agree with, but not 1639.
Well, I'm not saying that I don't agree with 1639 as a whole.
Right.
It's just certain aspects of it that I don't agree with.
Paul, your thoughts on 1639?
Well, 1639 was written I believe, for school safety, as I recall, and I agreed with the court that threw it out, and I think it's a flawed initiative that's ended up on our ballot, which is tragic to me. If I was going to address school safety, there's a number of things that I would do, but I don't know that gun control per se, when you look, gets to actual school safety. So I appreciate what Vancouver and Evergreen are doing about school safety. They're looking at health clinics they're going to run a pilot in 2 schools. I sat on their task force, and mental health in our schools is the most critical thing. If we really want to have impact into school safety, and if you really are concerned about school safety, and after the bridge, actually this would be my number 1 issue, would be mental health in our state and what we're doing and not doing. And specifically for our students, we need more school counselors. We need to bring in healthcare clinics into our school where when a kid needs help, that there's a professional there that can actually sit down with them and help them. But the idea that we have 300 million guns in the United States of America, and that by 1639, somehow by increasing background checks or something, or that we're going to now make a .22 an assault weapon. Seriously? Let's address the problem. And the problem is the number 2 reason that kids are dead. The number 1 is, well, it's suicide, and suicide by gun is number 1, and just behind that, I mean, just statistically, just barely behind that, is they take their life by some other method, and it's asphyxiation, and it's hanging themselves, and this is just tragic. We have kids in our society that need help, and that help is mental health, and we need to be there to help them, and that's what should be addressing school safety, not a gun initiative that I don't think will really help our kids, to be quite
And really
frank.
quick, would you be in favor of arming teachers in classrooms?
Heavens no.
Okay.
Not at all.
Okay.
There's too many things that can go wrong with arming teachers. Not at all. I think where I come from, addressing school safety. We had things like control, egress control, entrance and egress control. We had perimeter fencing, and out where I live in Ridgefield, my son, my oldest boy, went to View Ridge, and View Ridge sits right on the curb. Anybody can walk right into that campus, cause a lot of problems, and walk right out. Right? Schools where I come from in Houston aren't like that. There's fencing around schools, and I'm not saying that that's the case with every school here, but simple things like that, can make a difference in terms of school safety. I see that schools here have a resource officer or a sheriff's officer there to assist in security. Great. We had the same thing. I'm not saying the schools should be fortified like prisons, because there are schools in areas that schools are like that. Metal detectors and identification badges, and you have to dress a certain way, and you can only wear this, and you can only have that. I'm not saying that because that takes away from the freedom and creativity of children as it is. It makes it essentially you're turning kids into drones, and that's not what we need. That's not what we need. I think that we should take a huge look at school safety and figure out what we can do about that. But I definitely do not, and I mean specifically do not agree with arming teachers whatsoever. I think that was some of the dumbest rhetoric I've heard in addressing school safety.
Paul, what are your thoughts on Initiative 1631 and a carbon? In this case, a carbon fee, but how should we approach climate change and carbon taxes?
I think we need to be very careful on how we, I think we all want a clean environment. I know I certainly do. I believe that, once again, I think the intent was good. I say that, and yet I think the idea that we're going to charge a fee for carbon and that the fee has nothing to do with actually how we're going to fix carbon. So it's really just like a tax on carbon, and yet the money doesn't go back into fixing the problem. Clark County, we have a gas-fired plant. It's the largest, I think, that's in operation right now in Washington State. By the FERC rules, it meets the federal regulations for clean environment. It would be one of the type that you would build today. And yet, under this ruling, it will penalize our local PUD for using gas-fired, for using that plant. All of us are going to pay in that. It's a very convoluted system that I believe will hurt the most vulnerable in our community. We'll end up paying more for utilities. We'll all end up paying more, and yet the money won't go to fix the environment. It's just like it's a penalty that doesn't go back and fix the problem. So I will be voting no on that, and give me some good common sense legislation that will help create a better air quality. I mean, the simple thing is, if you look at the greatest amount of CO2s aren't emitted by that plant in our local area, nor is it in Seattle. The function of what it is driving our cars. That is the number one thing. So if you want to penalize somebody, I guess take a look and figure out how you're going to penalize them for driving. But don't penalize the PUD, and don't raise my utility rates, and don't raise the rates on SCH America, and don't raise the rates on good job providers in our community. Get us out of our cars, or make us pay more at the pump or something. I don't know, but that's where the CO2s are coming from in large quantity, and so I just find it odd how we go about it, and who we're penalizing for it. I just think it's wrong.
Damion, your thoughts on 1631?
I've heard a lot of things on 1631, both for and against, and even still to this day, I'm still listening to the argument and trying to learn more about it. I believe that wholeheartedly. One thing that I do not do is to argue with a subject matter expert. And when scientists tell me that climate change is a real thing, it's happening, and the data is there, the resources are there, the science is there, I believe that. I can see it around me. It's getting hotter. You got more wildfires. it's taking longer for winter to come. You know, and I think that science is a real thing. I'm not going to tell you that I'm a disbeliever. I would never say that because it's not true. I think that we should take the necessary steps to become a green state, and I think Washington has the potential to lead the way in that charge. Is taxation the way to make that happen? I don't know. I don't think it is. You know, I have to agree with Paul here, where we're saying that we're taxing certain entities, but where is that money going to go? What's it going to do? You know, if we're going to tax the entity, the business, or the driver of the car, or whomever we're going to tax for that, if we're going to tax that person, are we going to see in real time where that money is going and how it's working? Because if not, if we're just taxing to generate revenue, then no, I don't agree with that one at all.
But for you on 1631, still learning, still uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Paul, do you believe that climate change is real?
Of course, the climate is always changing. Is it real? Absolutely it is. Does man cause some of that change?
Yes,
Absolutely it does. Are there other extenuating circumstances? Realizing the greatest amount of CO2 that was emitted in the state of Washington last year was by forest fires, and the year before that, and the year before that. I would ask you, what are we doing to stop forest fires?
Sure.
I don't see a tax on forest fires, or I don't see us going in and cleaning the forests any better, to cleaning the underbrush and doing better forest management. I don't see that happening. But I just find it's the oddest thing of where we go on these issues. And we were all impacted a little bit. My daughter lives in Spokane. They had terrible air quality this summer from forest fires, just terrible. And the idea that we're going to, I sat there and told my daughter, she said, well, you understand, if 1631 passes, you're still going to have these beautiful forest fires. She says, seriously? I said, oh yeah. I said, it has nothing to do with it. And so I just think sometimes we're looking at the wrong things. There's things that we can do that can have a much greater impact. And like I said, I don't think there's any of us that want a dirty environment. So absolutely, let's move forward and make sure we're doing the right things for the right reasons and having the right impact. Absolutely, yeah.
You touched on it about mental health and what the state should do with that. So certainly there's been more than enough publicity over the troubles at Western State Hospital, for example. But what do you see happening with that system, and what does the legislature need to do in the next session to try to diffuse the tension and the problems at Western State Hospital, and also provide for better mental health care? Start with you.
That's me. I think the state should take a look at its management of that hospital. You know, I know people that work there. I know people that have been patients there, and none of them have had a great experience. I think the state should really look at the programs and figure out why it is that they were federally defunded. Granted, the $53 million that they lost was only 20% of its budget, and the governor has taken the steps to get Western State where it needs to be to fix that problem. Great. But that's, to me, and it's just my opinion, but it sounds like, again, just throwing money at the problem until it fixes itself, instead of really taking a good, hard look at what's going on. Put boots on the ground and figure out the problem. Because it's more than just a legislative issue or a budgetary issue. This is a people issue. This is a management issue. What's going on in Western State that is causing these problems? Why is it that you can't get quality nurses and quality employees in this hospital for these things to happen, for Western State to be up to par? I used to live a couple of blocks away from Western State when I was stationed at Fort Lewis, and to know what Western State is, and to see a wall that high, that was disturbing. And you see patients all the time wandering out of Western State. And that tells me something. Something's not right there. You either don't have enough staff, or your building security is not up to par. Those are budgetary issues that should be taken care of, and it shouldn't even be up for discussion. If this is your premier mental facility in the state, which, if I recall correctly, Western State is the largest mental facility that the state has, then you should treat it that way. It shouldn't be treated as a second-class entity. It should be treated as your premier entity, and things like that in so many words, I guess I'm trying to say that it's just a no-brainer. it's a no-brainer. Put boots on the ground and figure out the problem, solve it.
Okay. Paul?
It's a very, very difficult problem. When you look at Western states, I've toured it 2 or 3 times. I've been there. Probably most likely we need to, the buildings are very antiquated, old, facilities are completely outdated. There's a shortage of psychiatric practitioners in the United States as is. We have safety issues there. I could go on and on and on. So
Do we
we've got,
need to build an entirely new campus?
we might need to. The problem is the siting of it. No one wants that in their backyard.
Sure.
So do we tear down a section and start building a new section? I don't know. There's been chatter of that. We know that it's a big problem. And I think Damion said some real accurate things, but it's not just as simple as throwing money at it. We have to entice people to come to work at Western States. And like I said, the facilities in and of itself, there's a shortage of workers. So you could literally just look at it this way. I can go to Western States, which was built in 1920, or I can go to we just have a brand new mental hospital that was just built in Clark County. If you haven't seen it, it's beautiful. We have a bunch of work to do to entice people to come to work at Western States. So we got to get the federal government first happy, and then we got to look at the facility itself and say, what can we do? How do we do it? It's going to be a lot of work. And there's a part of me that says, I wonder if we took our eye off of it when, no matter what, we put billions of dollars into education. We're probably going to have to literally put $1 billion into Western States, to be quite frank. I mean, you're talking, I heard the figure, while I sat in a committee meeting, they were talking $800 million. So we'll just say $1 billion, just because I know how government works. So this isn't simple, and this isn't going to happen overnight. And I know one thing: if we're going to do it, let's do it right. Let's not do it 3 or 4 times. So I mean, this is not a simple or going to be an inexpensive fix. Along with that, though, I really believe, you kind of look back at our history, kind of how fashion comes back into style. I really believe, though, that there's a purpose for Western States, but there's also a purpose in us having local access to mental health facilities, where we can have regional facilities where if we have a family or a friend member, where we can go visit them, where they can receive adequate help locally, and they can have family support and friend support. Western States is set up not that way at all. And so I think you will see a shift where the most critical will end up at Western, and forensic beds probably exclusively, and then we will start to look at regionalization of mental health, and I really believe we need to do that. Is that going to cost money? Oh yeah. And that's why I'm kind of happy to have a little bit of McCleary out of my life. What's cool about our state,
You won't miss that.
well, it sucked up a lot of our money, to be quite frank, and there are other needs. Our state has continued, though, to grow during this economy. Our revenues have continued to increase. We have extra funds still, and now it's just a priority of what your priority. And when we were talking about the bridge, my next priority locally, honestly, would be mental health. For our kids, for our public in general. I believe it's a huge need in our community. It's part of our homeless situation, actually. A lot of those people have mental illness, and we need to help them. So it's a far-reaching problem, but I believe, for me, it would be my next bucket that I would look after the bridge. I mean, my number 2 issue would actually be mental health.
So tell me this, we touched upon several things. In your mind, Damion, what's the most pressing issue that we haven't brought up here?
I'm going to have to agree with Paul and go with mental illness. I have friends and what have you that are suffering from various mental illness, and they're not they're not receiving the proper care. As a veteran, I know firsthand about mental illness and how it's being treated at a federal level through the VA. You know, some vets are receiving what they would consider to be the proper care. Other veterans, not so much. I've seen friends, dear friends of mine, lose family members to mental illness from suicide because of not being able to receive the proper care. And I think that as a whole, we should be a little bit more empathetic and compassionate when it comes to issues like that. I don't think that that's one of the things that we should just throw our hands up and say, well, that's not my problem. You know, let them deal with that over there. I think that, you know, we as human beings, we're created to be one family. No division, no nothing. We're supposed to be here to help our fellow man. It's about service to mankind, not about the individual. And I think once we come to realize that, issues like mental health issues are going to start to, you know, we're going to start to see the solving of those types of problems. We're going to start to see, as Paul said, satellite campuses of Western State where you can go and visit a loved one, because, you know, I've been through my own battles with depression and PTSD that, you know, I just needed a loved one. I just needed the touch, the hug, or just to hear the voice that just made things better, you know. It's not always shove somebody into a room and medicate them until it clicks. Oh, there it is. I'm good now. That's not the solution, and it never should be. You know, I think we need to take a much deeper look at how we treat as how we deal with mental illness from a homeless perspective, from a veteran perspective, and just overall.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. What haven't we brought up today that is a priority?
Well, healthcare, and it goes along with mental health, I guess. Healthcare in general, we still have a lack of access of care in our state, and one of the things that I would love to work on this next session is increasing Medicaid rates to Medicare. We had that about 6 years ago, and the Vancouver clinic and other clinics were accepting more patients. And the problem is that the Medicaid reimbursement rate is too low, and they can only take a certain percentage of the population. If we could increase the rates on primary care physicians to Medicaid, from Medicaid to Medicare, we'd have much greater access. Would solve some of the mental health issues, and would get people into their primary care physician. Once again, not a cheap fix. That's about $80 million to $90 million a year to cover kids and adults. If you just want to cover kids, it's about $30 million. But we need to, we can do better. We can do better in health care for those who can least afford it. And we certainly can do better, as Damion said, for those people who are mentally ill that need help. And we just need to do a better job. And so those are areas that I think are real concerns of mine. I'm going to continue. I have my Smoking 21 bill. I believe that I would like to work on again this year. I've been told I think it'll pass both chambers, and that's important for youth. We have a lot of youth now that have resulted to vaping, and I'm not sure that vaping is a good alternative at some point. So I really believe that there's lots of work that can be done. So.
Great. Well, and then on that, we'll move on to give us your final pitch. I think just gave us part of it.
Yeah.
But tell us why voters should support you, and mention any notable endorsements. And so we'll start with Paul.
Okay. I'm running for re-election because I believe, as I've said, I have other work to do. And I think what's unique about myself is I have worked really hard to reach across the aisle, to be bipartisan, and I believe I have. I think that's important because we have very close government in our state right now, and the idea that I have to and I want to work with my counterparts, and I believe that's where good legislation takes place. So I want to continue to work on a couple of education issues I have, certainly some health care issues. The Smoking 21 is important to me. The Medicaid reimbursement rate is important to me. there's a variety of things that I want to continue to have the opportunity. And it has been a privilege. No matter what happens in this election, I'd be amiss if I didn't say how thankful I've been to have the opportunity to serve for 8 years as a representative of the 17th district. And I will, if I am fortunate enough to be reelected again, I will continue to reach out and to work and to attend numerous events to make sure that I'm always accessible. I think it's so important to make sure that you're accessible to anyone, no matter what the issue, and to sit down and listen to people and try to. I think the most rewarding part of this job is actually to help people, and you get those opportunities, and they're not that rare actually. You get about one a week. You help walk them through a system, and it's always good to change and help somebody in their life. So that's why I want to run again.
Great, thank you. And I'm sorry, any endorsements you want to mention?
I don't know. You can go to my website.
Sure.
I have numerous endorsements, as so does Damion. So yeah.
Damion, final pitch. Why should voters support you?
First, gentlemen, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me out, and it's been a pleasure to be out here talking with you like this. I'm running because I feel like it's time for a change in the way we're doing things in our legislature. No disrespect to Paul, but I think it's time for a fresh set of legs and a fresh set of eyes on things to make some new things happen and move things along. As I stated before, I would like to see changes to the way we handle our healthcare system, the way we handle our education system, and the way we handle our infrastructure. And I believe I'm the man to do it. So if I were to ask a voter to support me and they ask me why, I would say, well, because I'm the guy to get that done. Arrogance aside, I just believe it's time for change and new leadership, and I would bring that to the table. As far as my endorsements, I'm endorsed by a plethora of labor unions. You can go to my website and see those as well. I'm endorsed by Moms Demand Gun Sense, and a few others that you can find at my website as well. I can't name them all off the top of my head, but they can be found on my website.
Great. Well, thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
the
sir.
time.
Thanks for coming.
Very much. Absolutely.